Good morning, boys and girls. I'm so glad I get to spend some time with you this morning and share with you our Bible lesson. We're going to talk about what happened after Easter, but first I want to make sure that you know what the word resurrected means. Resurrected means that Jesus died on the cross, he died and he was buried, and then he was restored to life again. Living, breathing, walking, talking, eating, all of it. Life again. And you're going to hear that a bunch as you grow up, and I just wanted to make sure that you understand what that word means. It's really important, and that's what it means to be a Christian, is that we know and we believe in the resurrection. Okay, so did you know that after Jesus resurrected, he came several times and visited with the disciples? He did, it's true. And we're going to talk about one of those times, and our lesson this morning comes from one of the books in the Bible we've talked about before. It's one of the 4 books in the New Testament. Do you guys know what that word is that they're called? It's the genre of book. If you said gospel, you get 1,000 points, because that's what it is. It comes from the book of John, which is one of the 4 gospels. You get another 1,000 points if you can remember what all 4 of them are called. Do you remember? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and this one should be easy because I already said it. John, that's right. So we're going to talk about the 3rd time that Jesus came and visited his disciples. Now, some of the disciples were gathered together near the Sea of Galilee, which is actually a lake in Israel. And it's, I think, still a lake today. So they were hanging out and they decided they were going to go fishing. And here are the disciples. And by the way, you're going to have to use your imagination a little bit while I tell this story. So for instance, this is their boat, right? I know it doesn't look like a boat. It looks like a box, but we're going to use our imagination. This is the boat. So I don't really know exactly what each of the disciples look like, but we're just going to take a guess. So this is Thomas and Nathaniel and Simon Peter and James and John, brothers. And so they all got on the boat and they went out fishing. And they were fishing for a really long time. And here's the thing, when they went fishing, they didn't use poles, they used a net. I want to say not like this net. It's like this net in that this is a net, but I think it was very different than this net. But anyhow, they were fishing all night and they didn't have any fish. And so they saw somebody out on the shore and they couldn't quite make out who he was. And he said, "Hey friends, have you guys caught any fish yet?" And they're like, "No, thank you very much. We haven't caught any fish. Thank you for reminding us." And he gave them this cool tip. He said, "Wait a minute, throw your net on the other side of the boat." So they thought, well, what could it hurt? So they threw the net on the other side of the boat. And then all of a sudden, there were so many fish in the net. They're like, whoa, wait a minute. And then they remembered this happened before, didn't it? Who is that guy? That guy just isn't some guy. And then they realized it was their dear friend Jesus. He came to visit them again. Oh my gosh, they were so excited. And they had so many fish. Do you remember I said that we have to use our imagination, right? Okay, they had so many fish that they caught, and the net was bursting at the seams. Now, the Bible doesn't tell us how many or how big the net was, or even how big the boat was, but it does say that they caught 153 very large fish, which is very specific, isn't it? So it was a lot of fish, and it was a chore for them to bring that in. In fact, I said this was Simon Peter, right? Simon Peter decided he was going to jump out of the boat and go see Jesus right away because he didn't even want to wait. Isn't it interesting that at the beginning of the Bible, or the beginning of the gospel, not the Bible, but the beginning of the Gospels, when Jesus is meeting the disciples, he saw them out fishing, and it was kind of the same thing. They'd been fishing all night and they hadn't caught any fish. And he tells them to go back out and try again, and they do. And then they got this huge haul. And that's when they decided to follow him. And so I think that's kind of interesting. My favorite part about this story, though, is that while the disciples were out on the lake, Jesus was back on shore and he was preparing a meal. Now, I don't know how well you can see this. This is a fire, but we're going to pretend that it's on the ground like a fire should be, and we're going to pretend it's an actual fire. And the disciples get back to shore, and they see Jesus, and they pull the fish in, and then they see that Jesus had already started cooking. and he had a fire going, and he was cooking fish on the fire for them. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine what that must have been like? I want you to use your imaginations, okay? Okay, close your eyes and think about what it would have been like to feel the sand between your toes and to smell the wood burning and to feel the warmth of the fire and also to hear it crackling too. And best of all, boys and girls, they were with Jesus. They were in the presence of Jesus, their dear friend, their Savior, their Rabbi. They loved him so much and they were so glad to be with him. And they knew, I think they knew that they weren't going to see him often because he told them beforehand. I mean, he told them many times, I'm going to go to my Father's house. So they knew they weren't going to see him face to face always. I'm sure they treasured that meal with him. And here's the thing. These disciples, they saw Jesus die on the cross. And then they had breakfast with him on a beach some days later. Boys and girls, Jesus is who he says he is. Jesus is the Son of God. Jesus is our Savior. And just like Jesus invited the disciples to have breakfast with him, Jesus invites us to be with him too. Isn't that amazing? I hope you have a great week. In just a minute, Pastor Tim is going to share another time that the disciples encountered Jesus, this time on the road to Emmaus.